I was wrapping my granddaughter Sophie's Christmas scarf when my phone buzzed. On the kitchen table. I smiled, expecting a photo from my daughter. Instead, I read, "Don't you dare come for Christmas. We don't want to see you." My hands started shaking so badly I dropped the ribbon onto the floor. I called my son Michael, immediately certain there had to be some mistake. But after a long silence, he quietly said, "Maybe staying home is best this year, Mom." That was the moment I realized something far worse than rejection was happening inside my family. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own children suddenly shut you out at Christmas? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Tonight I could really use the company. 8 years after my husband died, people still told me how strong I was. I hated that word. Strong usually meant nobody noticed how lonely you were. Every morning, I woke up alone in the old white farmhouse Carl and I had bought 36 years earlier in northern Vermont. The floors creaked in the winter cold. The kitchen windows fogged whenever I made coffee. And every December, the house smelled like cinnamon pine needles and the pecan pies Carl used to beg me to make before Christmas dinner. For most people, the holidays are noisy. For widows, they echo. That December had been especially cold. Snow piled against the porch railings, and the maple trees behind the house looked frozen solid beneath silver ice. But inside, I tried my best to make things warm. I always did, especially for my family. I spent 3 days knitting a green scarf for Sophie because she once told me green made her feel like Christmas trees. Ethan was getting the astronomy telescope he'd been begging for since summer. I had wrapped every gift carefully tied ribbons around each box and handwritten little cards, the way my mother used to do. Love lived in details. At least that's what I always believed. I remember standing in the attic that morning, searching through old storage bins for Michael's childhood ornament, a tiny clay snowman he made in 2nd grade. One arm had broken off years ago, but I still hung it on the tree every December. I smiled when I found it. Then I cried. That happened more often these days. Not dramatic crying, just quiet tears that came without permission. Because the truth was, my children used to adore Christmas. When Olivia was little, she would sleep in my bed on Christmas Eve because she was too excited to rest. Michael used to wake us before sunrise and sprint downstairs in footed pajamas while Carl pretended to complain. Those memories lived in every corner of that house, and maybe that was why the silence hurt so much now. Things had started changing about 2 years earlier, though I kept making excuses for it. Olivia stopped calling every Sunday, then every other Sunday. Eventually, I became the person who always called first. She usually sounded distracted when she answered, "Mom, can I call you back?" "I'm at the boutique. I'm in a meeting. The kids are crazy today." At first, I believed her. Then I noticed she posted vacation photos online while ignoring my voicemails. Michael's changes were quieter, more subtle. My son had always been gentle-hearted, the kind of boy who rescued injured birds and cried when our Labrador died. Even as a grown man, he still called me Mama sometimes when he was tired. But after he married Ashley, something shifted. Ashley wasn't openly rude. Honestly, that would have been easier to understand. No, Ashley specialized in small humiliations, tiny cuts, the kind people pretend not to notice. Whenever I visited their Connecticut home, Ashley somehow made me feel like an unwanted guest instead of family. "Oh, Renee, you really don't have to help in the kitchen. Oh, Renee, we already have plans. Oh, Renee, the guest room's being renovated." Her smile never reached her eyes. And Michael, he always looked exhausted around her, nervous, like a man trying to keep peace in a house built on tension. I remembered one moment from Thanksgiving the year before that suddenly replayed in my mind differently. Ashley had been pouring wine while casually asking, "So, Renee, have you ever thought about downsizing that Vermont house?" I laughed lightly. "Why would I?" "Well, it's just so much space for one person." Michael immediately stared down at his plate. Ashley continued smiling. "You could move closer to family, maybe even one of those beautiful retirement communities." Retirement communities. I still remembered how cold those words felt. At the time, I brushed it aside. Now I wished I hadn't. That afternoon, after the horrible text from Olivia and Michael's painful phone call, I wandered through the house like a ghost. The scarf for Sophie still sat folded on the table. The telescope box leaned against the fireplace. I looked at the Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner, and for the first time in my life, I considered taking it down before Christmas even arrived. I sat on Carl's old recliner and stared at our family photos lining the mantel. There was Olivia at 16, smiling with braces, Michael holding Ethan as a newborn. One picture showed all of us together the last Christmas before Carl got sick. We looked happy, real happy, not social media happy, not staged smiles, the kind of happy that feels safe. I picked up that photo with trembling hands. "What happened to us?" I whispered. The house answered with silence. That evening, snow started falling harder outside. Thick flakes drifted past the windows while wind rattled the gutters. I made soup but couldn't eat it. My phone remained silent. No apology from Olivia, no follow-up call from Michael. Nothing. That hurt almost more than the message itself, because cruelty spoken in anger is one thing. Cruelty maintained is another. Around 9 that night, my phone buzzed again. My heart jumped so fast I nearly dropped it, but it wasn't one of my children. It was a fraud alert from my bank. I laughed bitterly at myself. Imagine being 67 years old and still hoping your children would choose you. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out across the snowy property. The barn roof was covered in white. Carl's old truck sat untouched beneath ice. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar rising beneath the sadness. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Instinct. Because deep down, beneath the heartbreak and confusion, a question had begun whispering louder and louder inside my mind. Why would both of my children suddenly turn against me at the exact same time families drift apart slowly? This felt organized, deliberate. And somewhere in the darkness of that Vermont night, I began to realize this wasn't only about Christmas. Something else was happening behind my back. Something much worse. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Olivia's message glowing on my phone screen. "Don't you dare come for Christmas." I kept rereading it, hoping I had misunderstood something, hoping maybe there was context missing, a joke gone wrong, a message meant for someone else. But no matter how many times I looked at those words, they still felt like a slap across the face. By morning, the snowstorm had passed, leaving Vermont covered in that strange winter brightness that almost hurts your eyes. I stood at the kitchen sink with a cup of untouched coffee, staring at the backyard while anxiety twisted inside my chest. I decided to call Olivia again, straight to voicemail. I waited 10 minutes and tried again. Voicemail. On the third call, she declined it immediately. My stomach dropped. Then, seconds later, another text appeared. "You always ruin everything. Leave us alone for once." I actually sat down at the kitchen table because my knees suddenly felt weak. Ruin everything. What on earth was she talking about? I tried thinking back over the past year. Had I said something offensive, forgotten something important, embarrassed her somehow? Nothing made sense. I had spent my entire life trying not to become one of those mothers people complain about. I never interfered in their marriages. I never criticized their parenting. I never demanded holidays or guilted them for being busy. If anything, I had spent years making myself smaller so my children could live comfortably. And somehow I was still the villain. The humiliation of it burned deep. I looked down at my phone, again staring at Olivia's words until they blurred through tears. Then I did something I rarely allowed myself to do. I got angry, not screaming angry, not dramatic angry, the kind of anger that grows quietly inside heartbreak. Because no matter how upset Olivia was, no decent daughter speaks to her mother that way unless something deeper is going on. And Michael's silence bothered me even more. My son wasn't cruel. Weak sometimes, yes. Avoidant, definitely, but not cruel. Which meant either someone was influencing him or he was scared of something. That thought stayed with me all morning. Around noon, I called him again. He answered on the fourth ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded tight, tired, like someone holding their breath. "Michael," I said softly, "please talk to me. What's happening?" A long silence followed. In the background, I heard cabinets closing, footsteps, then Ashley's voice somewhere farther away. "Who is that?" Michael lowered his voice immediately. "It's Mom." Another silence. I felt my chest tighten. Ashley didn't even say hello. I swallowed hard. Did I do something wrong? No, he answered too quickly. That one word told me everything. People who tell the truth don't rush like that. Then why is Olivia acting like this? He exhaled shakily. Mom, things have just been stressful. What things I can't really get into it. Michael. I heard him move like he was walking into another room. Then his voice dropped lower. I think maybe it's best if you stay home this Christmas. There it was again. Not because he wanted me there less, because he wanted me gone. And there's a difference. Tears stung my eyes. Why? Another long pause. Then Ashley's voice suddenly appeared much closer this time. Michael, are you seriously still on the phone? His tone changed instantly. I have to go. Michael, wait. Mom, please don't make this harder. The line disconnected. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the dark phone screen. Please don't make this harder. For who? That question haunted me. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I wandered around the house, pretending to organize things while my mind replayed every conversation I'd had with my children over the last year. Moments I ignored suddenly felt suspicious, like puzzle pieces turning over one by one. Ashley constantly asking about my finances. Olivia making strange comments about planning for the future. Michael becoming quieter whenever inheritance or property came up. I tried pushing the thoughts away. No mother wants to believe her children are capable of manipulating her, especially not at my age. By evening, loneliness settled over the house so heavily it felt physical. I turned on the Christmas tree lights just to make the rooms feel less empty. Outside, darkness covered the snow-covered fields. Wind brushed softly against the windows while old jazz records played quietly in the living room. Usually Christmas music comforted me. That night it made me ache. I eventually carried an old photo album from the bookshelf and sat beside the fire. The album was thick and worn from years of use. Inside were decades of Christmas mornings. Olivia decorating cookies with flour on her cheeks. Michael asleep beneath the tree after waiting for Santa. Carl smiling beside me while holding a turkey platter. I ran my fingers slowly across one photograph after another. There's something painful about seeing proof that people once loved you openly, because then you can't stop asking when it changed. One picture stopped me cold. It had been taken 5 years earlier. All of us stood together outside this very house during a snowstorm. Olivia had her arm around me. Michael was laughing about something Carl had said. Ashley stood beside him, smiling politely, while Ethan sat on my husband's shoulders. We looked like a family. Not perfect, but real. I stared at Olivia's face in the picture for a long time. Then I noticed something strange. Vanessa was there too, at the edge of the frame, watching. I frowned slightly. Vanessa Carter, Olivia's sister-in-law through marriage and somehow also her closest friend. I had never fully trusted that woman. Vanessa had charm in the way certain salespeople do. Too smooth, too observant. She always seemed to study people while pretending to compliment them. Carl used to say, that woman smiles with her teeth, not her heart. At the time, I thought he was being harsh. Now I wasn't so sure. I closed the album slowly. Then I realized something unsettling. Most of the distance between me and Olivia had started around the same time Vanessa became heavily involved in her life. A chill crept through me that had nothing to do with winter. At nearly 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. This time my heart leapt painfully before I even looked. But it wasn't Olivia. It was little Sophie. Or at least, it had been. A sticker notification popped onto my screen briefly. A dancing snowman with the words, "Love you, Grandma." Then the message vanished. Deleted. I stared at the screen in disbelief. A few seconds later, 3 dots appeared as if someone were typing, then disappeared. My throat tightened. Someone had taken the phone away from her. I knew it instantly, and suddenly, for the first time since this nightmare began, fear replaced sadness entirely. Because families don't behave like this naturally. This felt controlled, carefully controlled, and deep down I began realizing something terrifying. My children weren't simply shutting me out. Someone was trying to erase me from the family completely. The next morning I woke up with a headache so severe it felt like someone had tightened metal around my skull overnight. For a few peaceful seconds, lying beneath my heavy quilt, While pale winter light slipped through the curtains, I forgot everything. Then I remembered Olivia's message, Michael's cold silence, Sophie's deleted sticker, and the ache returned instantly. I forced myself out of bed and shuffled into the kitchen, wearing Carl's old flannel robe. Snow still blanketed the property outside, untouched, except for faint deer tracks near the tree line. Usually mornings in Vermont calmed me. The quiet had always felt peaceful. Now it felt isolating. I made coffee and tried distracting myself by wrapping the last of the presents, but every ribbon I tied only deepened the humiliation. Imagine being told not to come to Christmas after spending months preparing gifts for people you love. Around 10 o'clock, I finally did something I'd been avoiding. I opened Facebook. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? At 67 years old, social media still felt foreign to me. But like most grandmothers, I kept an account mainly to see photos of my family, or at least I used to. The first strange thing I noticed was that Olivia's profile picture had changed. A professionally staged Christmas photo. Olivia stood beside Ethan and Sophie in matching cream sweaters while snowflakes drifted around them in downtown Boston. Vanessa stood beside her, smiling brightly. But there was no sign of me, no mention of me either. I clicked on Olivia's page. My stomach slowly tightened. Post after post appeared. Holiday shopping, expensive dinners, parties, decorations, but nothing about family visits, nothing about Vermont, nothing about Grandma. Then I noticed something even stranger. I couldn't see many of the older family photos anymore. The albums from previous Christmases were gone. Pictures of Carl had disappeared too. At first I thought maybe Facebook was glitching. Then I realized the truth. She had hidden them from me. My hands started trembling again. I clicked into Messenger to send Olivia one final message. That's when I saw it. You cannot reply to this conversation. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My own daughter had blocked me. Actually blocked me. For a long moment, I just sat there frozen at the kitchen table while humiliation crawled through my chest like fire ants. Blocking strangers is one thing. Blocking your widowed mother days before Christmas, that takes intention. I whispered aloud, "What are you doing to me?" But the silence answered again. I should have closed the app then. I should have protected myself. Instead, like most hurt people, I kept digging for answers that would only wound me more. And that's when I found the post. It had been uploaded 3 days earlier, a photo of Olivia staring sadly out a cafe window while holding a coffee mug. The caption read, "Some people don't stop hurting you just because they're family. Protecting your peace matters." Over 400 comments. My chest tightened painfully as I scrolled. So proud of you for setting boundaries. Toxic parents never change. You deserve peace this Christmas. You're so brave. Brave. For what I felt physically sick. None of those people knew me. None of them knew the years I spent working double shifts while Carl battled cancer. None of them knew I sold our lake cabin to save Olivia's boutique after it nearly collapsed. None of them knew I paid Michael's graduate school tuition when he couldn't afford it. But somehow online, I had become a monster, a toxic mother. And the worst part, Olivia never corrected them. Not once. Tears blurred my vision so badly I almost missed the private message notification appearing in the corner of the screen. It was from an old church friend named Barbara, Renee. I hesitated to send this, but I think you should know what's being said. Below her message was a screenshot. I clicked it open. My heart nearly stopped. It was from a private Facebook group for Boston mothers. Someone had anonymously posted about an emotionally manipulative elderly mother who uses money to control her children. The details were vague enough to avoid names, but specific enough that anyone close to Olivia would recognize me. The post claimed I guilted my children constantly, that I threatened to remove them from my will, that I ruined holidays with emotional outbursts. None of it was true. None of it. I pressed my hand against my mouth as panic spread through me. Because lies repeated often enough become stories, and stories become reputations. Suddenly, so many moments started making terrible sense. Friends becoming distant, people sounding awkward around me, Olivia acting rehearsed during conversations. Someone had been building a narrative about me for months, maybe longer, and I hadn't even noticed. I immediately called Barbara. She answered softly, "Oh, Renee, who posted it?" "I don't know, But Olivia's been discussing family trauma publicly for a while now. Family trauma. The words felt surreal. Barbara hesitated before continuing. I didn't want to upset you, but Vanessa comments on almost every post. There it was again. Vanessa. Always nearby. Always involved. I rubbed my forehead slowly. What exactly has Olivia been saying? Barbara lowered her voice carefully. She's been implying you're controlling, that you use money to manipulate people. I laughed bitterly. The irony almost choked me. I had spent years giving my children financial help without asking for anything in return. Olivia's first business loan, Michael's MBA tuition, Ashley's medical bills after Ethan was born prematurely. I never kept score. Love wasn't supposed to keep score. But suddenly I realized something painful. People who benefit from your generosity sometimes rewrite history the moment you stop being useful. After hanging up with Barbara, I sat motionless for nearly an hour. Snow drifted softly outside while the Christmas tree lights blinked in the corner of the room. I looked around the farmhouse differently now, not like a home, like a fortress, because for the first time I understood I wasn't dealing with temporary family tension. I was being systematically isolated. My reputation was being destroyed quietly behind my back. And worse, my grandchildren were being pulled into it too. That thought shattered something inside me. Sophie deleting that sticker suddenly felt enormous. Not accidental, intentional. Children don't hide love from grandparents unless an adult teaches them to. By late afternoon, a terrible instinct pushed me to check one more thing. The family group chat. The one Michael created years ago called Jenkins Christmas Chaos. I opened my messages and searched for it. Nothing appeared. Confused, I searched again. Still nothing. Then realization hit me. I hadn't left the chat. I'd been removed. I stared blankly at the screen while a deep coldness spread through my body. That group had existed for 9 years. Birthday photos, holiday plans, family jokes, Carl's final Christmas pictures. Everything lived there, and they erased me from it like I was dead already. My breathing became shaky, not because of anger, because suddenly, terrifyingly, I understood the real goal here. They weren't simply excluding me from Christmas. They were slowly rewriting the family story without me in it. And if I didn't figure out why soon, I might lose my children and my grandchildren completely. 2 days later, I drove to the bank in Montpelier through falling snow and 20-mile-per-hour winds. Normally, I love that drive. The roads curved through white-covered hills and sleepy little towns, where wreaths still hung from lampposts and tiny diners advertised hot cider on handmade signs. Vermont looked like a Christmas card in December, but that morning everything felt sharp and colorless. I gripped the steering wheel tightly the entire way there. The truth was, I needed something normal, something concrete. After days of confusion, humiliation, and sleepless nights, I wanted one simple task that still made sense. Every year before Christmas, I transferred money into separate savings accounts for Ethan and Sophie. Their grandfather and I had started the education trust when Ethan was born. It wasn't millions of dollars, but it was enough to help both children someday with college, a first home, or simply a safer future. Carl believed deeply in leaving stability behind. Money disappears, he used to say. But opportunity changes generations. After he died, I kept contributing faithfully every Christmas, even when Olivia forgot birthdays, even when Michael became distant. The children were innocent. At least that's what I still believe then. When I entered the bank, warm air rushed against my face, carrying the smell of coffee and wet wool coats. Christmas garlands hung across the counters, while soft instrumental carols played overhead. For a moment, I almost felt foolish for being so upset. Then reality returned. The young teller named Grace smiled warmly when she saw me. "Mrs. Jenkins, good morning." "Here for the holiday transfers?" "Yes," I answered softly. She typed for a moment, but then her expression changed slightly. Not alarmed, just confused. My stomach tightened immediately. "What is it?" Grace looked hesitant. "I'm sorry, let me pull something up." I stood silently while she clicked through several screens. Then she frowned. "Mrs. Jenkins, did you recently authorize anyone else to access the grandchildren's trust accounts?" Every muscle in my body went cold. "No." She looked uncomfortable instantly. I'm sorry. I just see an access inquiry made last week. An inquiry by who? She hesitated again. Normally, bank employees are careful about privacy, but I think my face must have frightened her. It appears your daughter, Olivia Carter, contacted the bank requesting information about withdrawal conditions. I stared at her. I'm sorry, I whispered. Withdrawal conditions. Yes, ma'am. She wanted to know whether the accounts could be accessed early under family hardship exceptions. My heart began pounding so loudly I could barely hear the Christmas music anymore. That's impossible, I said immediately. Olivia knows those accounts are protected until the children are adults. Grace nodded carefully. That's what we informed her. I gripped the edge of the counter. Did she access anything? No, absolutely not. She doesn't have authorization. Relief flashed through me briefly. Then another emotion replaced it. Fear. Because Olivia never even mentioned those accounts to me. Not once. And suddenly pieces started shifting into place inside my mind. The luxury handbags. The expensive Boston rooftop dinners. The new SUV she posted online 2 months earlier. The designer boots. The constant claims that business was slow. I remembered one particular phone call from September. Olivia had sounded unusually emotional that night. Mom, do you ever regret not living more for yourself? I laughed lightly back then. I had you and Michael. That was enough. Now replaying it in my head, the conversation felt strange, calculated almost, like she was measuring how much sacrifice I'd still be willing to make. Grace's voice pulled me back. Would you still like to make the holiday deposits? I swallowed hard. Yes. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. While she processed the transfers, I stared out the window at snow drifting across Main Street. My daughter tried to access her children's trust fund behind my back, not because of an emergency, because she wanted money. And suddenly, for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to think something I had resisted with every ounce of my heart. Maybe this wasn't personal hatred. Maybe it was financial desperation. That realization terrified me even more. Because people drowning financially can become people you no longer recognize. After finishing the paperwork, I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes without turning the engine on. Snow tapped softly against the windshield while my thoughts spiraled. Had Olivia lost the boutique? Was Michael involved somehow too? Did Ashley know? Questions piled on top of questions, until my chest felt tight again. Finally, I drove toward home, but halfway there, I suddenly turned off the highway and pulled into a small gas station parking lot instead. Because another memory had surfaced. 3 months earlier, Olivia posted photos from a luxury resort in Miami. At the time, I remembered feeling confused because she'd told me business was struggling badly. I pulled out my phone and searched her Instagram again. Photo after photo appeared. Cocktails, spa weekends, designer shopping bags, fancy restaurants, perfect family smiles. Vanessa appeared in almost every image, always beside her, always commenting things like, "You deserve this life. Manifest abundance. Leave toxic energy behind." Toxic energy. There was that phrase again. I zoomed in on one photo Olivia had posted only a week earlier. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Olivia smiling beside her Christmas tree holding champagne. But behind her, partially visible on a marble countertop, sat a stack of overdue envelopes. Bright red lettering. Final notice. My pulse quickened. I zoomed further. One envelope had a visible logo from a credit card company. Another appeared to be commercial property management. The boutique. Suddenly I knew. Not fully, but enough. Olivia was drowning financially, and desperate people start rewriting morality to survive. The realization hit me so hard I nearly cried right there in the gas station parking lot, because despite everything, part of me still wanted to protect her. That's the curse of motherhood. Even betrayal doesn't erase instinct. I drove home slowly through thickening snowfall, while memories replayed differently now. Olivia growing defensive whenever money came up, Michael sounding anxious lately, Ashley asking suspicious questions about my estate. No, this wasn't random cruelty anymore. There was strategy behind it. And for the first time, another terrifying possibility entered my mind. What if excluding me from Christmas wasn't only emotional? What if they were trying to keep me away long enough to hide something bigger? By the time I reached the farmhouse, darkness had fallen across the property. I carried the wrapped gifts inside and set them beside the tree. Then I just stood there quietly in the glowing living room. The house suddenly didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt watched, like invisible hands were moving pieces around me while I struggled to understand the game. I walked slowly to Carl's old desk in the corner and opened the bottom drawer. Inside sat a business card I hadn't touched in years. Howard Green, our longtime family attorney. Carl trusted him completely. My fingers hovered over the card for several seconds. Then I picked it up, because deep in my bones I knew one thing now with absolute certainty: my children were hiding something. And whatever it was, it had already gone far beyond Christmas. Howard Green's office looked exactly the same as it had 20 years earlier. Dark wooden shelves lined with legal books, green banker lamps glowing softly beside stacks of files, the faint smell of coffee and old paper lingering in the air. Somehow that familiarity nearly broke me. Carl and I used to come here together, back when life still felt solid, back when our family was whole. Howard himself had aged considerably since I last saw him. His silver hair was thinner now, and deep lines framed his mouth, but his eyes remained sharp and kind. The moment he saw me step into his office, his expression changed. Concern, not surprise. Concern. "Renee," he said quietly, standing immediately. "You look exhausted." I tried to smile politely, but it collapsed halfway across my face. "I think my children are trying to destroy me." The words sounded dramatic, spoken aloud. But Howard didn't laugh. That frightened me more than if he had. He guided me into his office and closed the door carefully behind us. "Tell me everything." So I did. The Christmas text, Michael's strange behavior, the Facebook posts, the bank inquiry, the deleted message from Sophie. Howard listened, without interrupting once. He simply folded his hands together and watched me with increasing seriousness. When I finally finished, silence filled the room. Then he sighed deeply. "Renee, there's something I need to ask you." A chill crept down my spine instantly. "What?" His eyes held mine carefully. "Has Michael contacted you recently about your estate?" My mouth went dry. "No." Howard nodded slowly, almost like he expected that answer. Then he opened a file drawer beside his desk. What he pulled out next changed everything. It was a legal notepad, several pages clipped together. My hands began trembling before he even spoke. "About 6 weeks ago," Howard said carefully, "Michael requested a private consultation." I stared at him. My heartbeat pounded loudly in my ears. He asked questions regarding conservatorship law. I blinked slowly. "I don't understand." Howard's voice became gentler. He wanted information about how adult children can petition for legal authority over an aging parent's finances and medical decisions. The room tilted slightly. I actually gripped the armrest to steady myself. "No," I whispered immediately. "No, Michael wouldn't." He specifically asked what evidence courts look for when determining mental decline. I felt sick, physically sick, like all the oxygen had vanished from the room. Howard continued carefully, clearly choosing each word with precision. He asked about memory issues, confusion, emotional instability, isolation, whether grief-related behavior after widowhood could support a competency review. Every sentence felt like another knife sliding between my ribs. Michael, my sweet boy, the child who once cried because he accidentally stepped on a frog. I stared at Howard in disbelief. "Are you telling me my son was trying to declare me incompetent?" Howard hesitated. "I'm telling you he was asking questions that deeply concern me." Tears burned instantly behind my eyes. But why? Howard leaned back slowly. "That's the part that troubles me." He opened another folder. "Renee, did Ashley ever ask detailed questions about your property?" A terrible memory surfaced immediately. Last spring, Ashley sitting at my kitchen table stirring coffee while casually saying, "This house must be worth a fortune now." Another conversation during summer. "It's dangerous for older women to live alone." Then Thanksgiving, retirement communities, selling the farmhouse. At the time they felt like annoying comments. Now they felt like scouting missions. I looked back at Howard. Oh my God. He nodded grimly. I had concerns after Michael's meeting, but ethically, I couldn't discuss it unless formal proceedings were initiated. Formal proceedings. They haven't filed anything. Yet. He didn't say the word aloud. He didn't need to. I pressed trembling fingers against my forehead. Everything suddenly made horrifying sense. The online narrative painting me unstable. The toxic mother accusations. The isolation from family. Even the timing. Christmas, a period when everyone would naturally assume an elderly widow spending the holiday alone, must be emotionally difficult. Perfect conditions to portray me as mentally fragile. "Oh my God," I whispered again. Howard's voice softened. "Renee, I need you to listen carefully now." I nodded weakly. If someone wanted to pursue conservatorship aggressively, establishing a public narrative of instability beforehand could strengthen perception. Perception, not truth. Perception. My stomach twisted violently. They're building a case against me. Howard didn't answer immediately. That silence told me enough. I looked around the office blindly, suddenly unable to sit still. I stood and walked toward the window, overlooking snowy downtown Montpelier. People moved peacefully below, carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. Normal lives. Meanwhile, mine was quietly collapsing. I gave them everything I whispered. Howard remained silent behind me. I sold our lake cabin for Olivia. Still silence. I paid Michael's tuition. My voice cracked. I buried my husband and kept this family together alone. Finally, Howard spoke softly. Good parents often assume sacrifice creates loyalty. I closed my eyes, but entitlement can distort gratitude over time. The truth of that hurt more than anything. Because deep down I already knew it. I just never wanted to admit it. After several minutes, I finally turned back toward him. "Do they have any chance?" Howard answered immediately. "Legally." Based on what I know now, no. Relief flooded through me briefly. Then he added, "But emotionally manipulative claims can still create enormous damage." My chest tightened again. "They've already started." Howard nodded. "Yes." I sat back down slowly, suddenly exhausted beyond words. Then another horrifying thought struck me. The trust funds. Howard's expression sharpened instantly. What about them? I explained Olivia's attempt to access Ethan and Sophie's accounts. Howard leaned forward immediately. "That's extremely important." "Why?" "Because desperation changes legal strategy." He removed his glasses thoughtfully. "If Olivia's finances are unstable and Ashley believes significant assets are tied up in your estate, they may view conservatorship as a solution." I stared at him. Not children worried about their mother, people trying to gain control. The realization hollowed me out. Howard suddenly asked, "Have you updated your estate documents recently?" "No." "When Carl passed?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That needs to change immediately." Something in his tone frightened me. "You think they'll try something soon?" Howard didn't soften the answer. "I think Christmas may be strategically important." My pulse spiked. What does that mean? If you become isolated from the family during the holidays, emotional reactions from you afterward could potentially be reframed as instability, as irrational behavior, as proof. I suddenly remembered Olivia's text again. "Don't you dare come." Not merely cruel, provocative, designed to hurt, designed to trigger emotional responses. My breathing grew uneven. Oh my God. They wanted me upset. Howard watched me carefully. "Renee, have you sent angry messages, made threats? Public scenes? No. Good." I realized then how close I'd come to exactly that. If I had shown up at Olivia's house crying and furious, if neighbors filmed it, if social media saw it, dear God, I sank back in the chair, horrified. Ashley, Vanessa, maybe even Olivia. They weren't simply excluding me. They were maneuvering me, trying to push me into behaving emotionally so they could use it against me. And Michael. My heart broke thinking about him, because suddenly I understood something tragic. My son wasn't leading this. He was trapped inside it. Howard slid a legal pad toward me gently. "We need to start protecting you immediately." I looked at him quietly. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sitting in a lawyer's office as a mother helping her children. I was sitting there preparing to defend myself from them, and nothing had ever hurt more. After my meeting with Howard, I stopped crying. That may sound cold, but there comes a point in certain betrayals where grief becomes something quieter, sharper, more alert, like stepping barefoot onto broken glass and suddenly realizing you can't afford to fall apart because the people hurting you are counting on exactly that. The drive home from Montpellier felt different from every drive before it. For days I had been reacting emotionally, confused, wounded, desperate for explanations. Now for the first time I began observing instead. And once I started observing, things became impossible to ignore. The moment I arrived home, I sat at Carl's old desk with a yellow legal pad and wrote down every strange incident from the past 2 years. Every comment, every financial conversation, every uncomfortable holiday interaction. Patterns emerged almost immediately. Ashley always pushed conversations toward my future care, my house, or my finances. Vanessa always intensified Olivia's resentment after family gatherings. And Olivia herself, she only became openly hostile after her boutique started gaining online popularity. At first, success made her glow. Then suddenly it made her frantic. I remembered visiting Boston last spring. Olivia had taken me to lunch at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the harbor. Everything about the afternoon felt expensive designer handbag, luxury sunglasses, valet parking. But halfway through the meal, I noticed her hands shaking while checking her phone. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Just business stuff." A few minutes later, she excused herself to take a call. I overheard enough to remember one sentence clearly. Now I said, "I'll have the money by January." At the time, I assumed it was inventory stress. Now my stomach tightened thinking about it. I opened my laptop and searched her boutique website. The homepage looked polished. Professional photos. Holiday promotions. Elegant branding. But something else stood out. Huge discount banners. Final clearance. Store-wide liquidation. Last chance inventory. Liquidation. My pulse quickened. I clicked through customer reviews. Recent ones were brutal. Orders delayed. Refund complaints. Missing shipments. Then I checked the business registration records online. What I found made my chest go cold. Olivia had taken out a commercial loan against the boutique nearly a year earlier. A very large one, and based on the filing dates, payments were overdue. I leaned back slowly in my chair. There it was. Desperation. Real desperation. Suddenly, Olivia's behavior made horrifying sense. People drowning financially often rewrite reality to survive psychologically. If she viewed me not as her mother, but as an obstacle standing between her and financial rescue, then everything changed. I rubbed my temples, exhausted, but another question still haunted me. Why was Michael involved? My son had a stable career. He worked in finance. He and Ashley lived comfortably in Connecticut. They weren't wealthy, but they certainly weren't struggling like Olivia appeared to be. Unless Ashley. That thought lingered heavily. I remembered a dinner 6 months earlier when Ashley casually joked, "Well, technically Ethan and Sophie are the only ones in this family with guaranteed trust funds." At the time, everyone laughed awkwardly. Now I realized something chilling. Ashley wasn't joking. She was calculating. That evening, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. Monica Reynolds, an old friend of Olivia's. The kind of woman who notices things other people miss. She answered after 2 rings. Renee. Her voice immediately sounded nervous, which meant she already knew something. "Monica," I said gently, "I need you to be honest with me." A long pause followed. Then she sighed heavily. "Oh, Renee." There it was again. That tone. The tone people use when they know you've been lied to for a long time. "What's going on with Olivia?" Monica hesitated carefully. "I don't want to betray her. I'm her mother." Silence. Then finally, "She's in serious financial trouble." My eyes closed. How serious? She's behind on rent for the boutique. Credit cards, too. I swallowed hard. How bad? Bad enough that collectors have started calling. I felt physically ill. Monica lowered her voice. "And Vanessa's been making everything worse." Of course she had. "What do you mean she keeps convincing Olivia she deserves a luxury lifestyle no matter what?" telling her rich people leverage assets all the time. Assets, not work, not budgeting, assets. My assets, Monica continued carefully. She's been telling Olivia you're sitting on money while they struggle. The cruelty of that nearly took my breath away. I had already given Olivia hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. The boutique itself only existed because I sold Carl's beloved lake cabin after his death. I still remembered signing those papers while grieving. Carl adored that cabin. But Olivia cried in my kitchen saying she needed one chance to build something meaningful, and I gave it to her. Because mothers do that. Now somehow I had become selfish, greedy, manipulative. Monica's next words shook me even harder. Renee, I think Vanessa's been encouraging Olivia to cut you off emotionally. I gripped the phone tighter. Why? So she won't feel guilty asking for more money. The room went silent around me. There it was, the truth I had been avoiding. This wasn't just financial desperation, it was moral decay. Vanessa had slowly transformed my daughter's guilt into resentment because resentment makes exploitation easier. A child who feels ashamed taking from their mother eventually stops. A child convinced their mother owes them never does. After hanging up with Monica, I sat motionless in the darkening living room. Christmas lights reflected softly across the windows while snow continued falling outside. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt old, not physically, spiritually old, like suddenly understanding how families break apart in ways nobody sees coming. Not through one giant betrayal, through 1,000 tiny permissions, tiny selfishnesses, tiny lies, tiny justifications. And somewhere along the way, people stopped seeing each other as human beings. I thought about Michael again. Then another memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, Ashley asked strange questions during dinner. What happens to the trust if something happens to you? At the time, I answered casually, Howard manages everything legally. Ashley smiled tightly. And if someone thought you weren't capable anymore, I remembered laughing uncomfortably. Now my blood ran cold. She had been testing possibilities long before Christmas. I suddenly stood and walked to the bookshelf where old family albums sat. Inside one album, tucked between photographs, I found something unexpected. A folded receipt. Boston Harbor Jewelers, $3,400. Purchased by Olivia. Dated only 6 weeks earlier. $3,000 on jewelry while trying to access her children's trust fund. I stared at the receipt in disbelief. Then something inside me changed permanently. Not because of the money, because of the choice. Olivia wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting to maintain appearances. And appearances mattered more to her now than honesty, more than family, more than me. That realization hurt deeper than all the cruel messages combined, because suddenly I understood the ugliest truth of all. They didn't want me gone because I was toxic. They wanted me gone because I still represented accountability, and accountability threatens people living inside lies. Outside snow covered the Vermont fields in perfect white silence. Inside, I finally accepted something devastating. If I didn't protect myself now, my own children might destroy everything Carl and I spent our lives building. 3 days before Christmas, I stopped trying to defend myself. That was the part nobody expected. Not Olivia, not Ashley, not Vanessa, probably not even Michael. Because people who manipulate others usually prepare for resistance. They prepare for tears-screaming desperate phone calls, dramatic confrontations. What they don't prepare for is silence. And silence can terrify guilty people far more than anger ever will. The morning I made my decision, Vermont woke beneath another blanket of snow. The farmhouse was quiet except for the low hum of the heater and the occasional crackling sound from the fireplace. I stood in the kitchen holding my coffee, staring at the Christmas gifts still stacked beneath the tree. Sophie's scarf, Ethan's telescope, the handmade ornaments, all prepared by a grandmother who had been told not to come. For the first time since this nightmare began, I looked at those gifts without crying. Not because the pain disappeared, because something inside me had hardened. Howard's words kept echoing in my mind. They may be trying to provoke emotional instability. Fine. Then I would give them the opposite. Calm, measured, controlled. That morning, I sat at Carl's old desk and wrote 2 letters, one to Olivia, one to Michael. Short, polite, emotionless. I rewrote them 4 times before they sounded exactly the way I wanted. No guilt, no pleading, no accusations, just dignity. When I finally finished, the letters read, "I understand your wishes and will respect your decision not to have me present for Christmas this year. I truly hope the holiday brings peace to your family. Love, Mom." That was all. No mention of the humiliation, no mention of the lies, no mention of the betrayal. I mailed them before I could change my mind. Then I drove directly to Howard Green's office. The roads were slick with fresh ice, but my hands stayed steady on the steering wheel this time. Fear still lived inside me, but it no longer controlled me. Now I wanted facts, protection, strategy. Howard already had several folders waiting when I arrived. "You look different today," he observed quietly. "I think I finally understand what's happening." He nodded once. "That can be painful. It is." I sat across from him and folded my gloves carefully in my lap. "What do we need to do?" For the next 2 hours, we went through every legal document connected to my estate. Every trust, every account, every property record. Carl had been meticulous about financial planning, which suddenly felt like a final act of love from beyond the grave. Howard explained everything carefully. The Vermont farmhouse, the investment accounts, the grandchildren's trust funds, life insurance reserves, emergency directives, medical authority provisions. As he spoke, one terrible realization became unavoidable. Ashley and Vanessa had likely underestimated me. They assumed I was simply an emotional elderly widow clinging to family approval. What they didn't understand was this: Carl and I built our lives carefully, and careful people leave records. By noon, several major changes had already begun. Howard helped me freeze discretionary access tied to the children's educational trusts. We updated emergency contact structures. We documented concerns regarding potential coercion. Most importantly, Howard advised me to begin recording every interaction moving forward. "Documentation matters," he said firmly. The sentence sounded cold, but suddenly I understood why coldness protects people. Emotional people explain themselves. Prepared people preserve evidence. At one point, Howard asked quietly, "Do you still want Olivia and Michael to inherit equally?" The question hit harder than I expected, because despite everything, I still loved my children. That's the ugly truth nobody talks about in family betrayal stories. Love doesn't shut off automatically when people hurt you. Sometimes it survives long after trust dies. I stared down at my hands for a long moment. "Yes," I finally whispered, "but not without safeguards." Howard nodded approvingly, so we added them. Strict safeguards. The grandchildren's trust would now remain fully protected from parental access under any hardship claims. The farmhouse could not be sold without independent legal review, and if any conservatorship petition ever appeared, Howard would immediately challenge it formally. Piece by piece, I stopped being vulnerable. That realization felt strangely empowering, and heartbreaking at the same time, because no mother dreams of sitting in a lawyer's office building defenses against her own children. When I returned home that evening, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt strategic. I made soup, lit candles, turned on soft jazz, and for the first time in days, I slept almost peacefully, until the phone rang the next morning. "Michael." I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded confused immediately. "You're not upset." I nearly smiled. There it was. Disappointment. Not from cruelty, exactly, from expectation. They expected emotional chaos. Instead, I sounded calm. "No." I answered gently. "I understand." A pause followed. Then, "You got my message." "Yes." Another silence. I could practically hear his anxiety growing through the phone, because people expecting confrontation don't know what to do with grace. "I just think this Christmas is complicated," he said awkwardly. "I'm sure it is." "Mom." His voice wavered slightly, and suddenly I realized something important. Michael sounded guilty, not angry, not hateful, guilty, which meant somewhere inside him conscience still existed. That mattered. We spoke only a few minutes before he hung up nervously, but after the call ended, I noticed something strange. Ashley never got on the phone, not once. Usually she inserted herself into every conversation. This time she stayed silent, listening perhaps, waiting. I began wondering whether my calmness frightened her. That afternoon, another unexpected thing happened. Olivia texted me. Not an apology, not kindness, just confusion. You're really not coming. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. No, sweetheart. I'm respecting your wishes. 3 dots appeared immediately. Disappeared. Reappeared. Then vanished completely. No response. And suddenly, for the first time, I understood the power shifting quietly beneath everything. They expected me to chase them, to beg, to emotionally unravel. Instead, I had stepped backward calmly, which meant now they had space to hear the echo of their own behavior. That night, while snow fell softly outside the farmhouse windows, I sat alone beside the Christmas tree with a blanket over my knees. The house was still lonely, still painful, but something fundamental had changed. For days, I believed I was powerless because my children rejected me. Now I realize something else entirely. People lose power over you the moment you stop begging them to love you properly. And somewhere far away in Boston and Connecticut, I suspected my silence was beginning to make certain people very nervous indeed. Christmas Eve arrived, wrapped in snow and silence. The farmhouse glowed softly beneath white-covered pine trees, while cold wind swept across the Vermont fields. Inside the fireplace crackled gently beside the untouched gifts still sitting under my tree. For the first time in 39 years, I was spending Christmas alone, at least physically. Emotionally, I felt surrounded by ghosts. Carl's laughter still lived in those walls. The children's tiny footsteps still echoed in my memory every time the floorboards creaked upstairs. Even the kitchen carried traces of old holidays, the smell of cinnamon roasted pecans, hot cider. I stood at the window that evening, wearing a cream-colored sweater Carl once bought me in Burlington years ago. Somewhere in Boston, my daughter was hosting Christmas without me. And despite everything she'd done, part of me still wondered if she was okay. That's motherhood, even after betrayal concern survives. Around 6 o'clock, Howard called. It's time. I closed my eyes briefly. Are you sure? Yes. My stomach tightened painfully. Earlier that morning, Howard had finalized the legal documents we prepared throughout the week. The papers included updated trust protections, frozen discretionary financial support, and formal notices regarding unauthorized access inquiries into the grandchildren's accounts. But there was something else too. An official financial audit request tied to certain family-linked transfers Carl and I had quietly funded over the years. Howard believed it was necessary. I hated every second of it. Still, I agreed, because sometimes love without boundaries becomes permission for destruction. Will Michael be there? I asked quietly. Yes. And Ashley? A pause. Yes. I stared out at the falling snow. What about Vanessa Howard's tone hardened slightly? She's there too. Of course she was. Like smoke inside every room of this disaster. I exhaled slowly. All right. We'll proceed carefully. After hanging up, I sat alone beside the fireplace for a long time, holding Carl's wedding ring between my fingers. I used to wear it on a chain around my neck after he died. That night, I held it like a prayer. Please help me do the right thing, I whispered into the empty room. Because despite everything, I still didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. Meanwhile, nearly 200 miles away in Boston, Olivia's Christmas party was already in full swing. I know that now because later Michael described every detail to me. The penthouse apartment was decorated like a luxury magazine spread. White candles, gold ribbons, expensive catered food, crystal glasses lined across marble countertops. The kind of Christmas designed for photographs rather than memories. Olivia wore a velvet emerald dress and greeted guests with polished smiles while Vanessa floated beside her carrying champagne. To outsiders, they looked glamorous, successful. Untouchable. But according to Michael, tension sat underneath everything. Ashley kept checking her phone constantly. Vanessa drank too much too quickly. And Olivia. She seemed distracted all evening, waiting for something, or fearing it. At one point, one of Olivia's wealthy friends reportedly asked, "So your mom really isn't coming?" Olivia laughed lightly. "No, we needed healthy boundaries this year." Healthy boundaries. That phrase again. Michael later told me hearing those words made him physically uncomfortable, because even he no longer sounded convinced by the lies. Still, nobody challenged Olivia publicly. People rarely do when luxury and confidence are involved. Then, shortly after 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and everything changed. Howard Green stood outside holding a black leather portfolio while snow dusted the shoulders of his coat. The moment Olivia saw him, her face reportedly lost all color. "What are you doing here?" she asked immediately. Howard remained calm. "I'm here on behalf of Renee Jenkins." According to Michael, the room went silent instantly. Even the music suddenly felt too loud. Vanessa stepped forward first. "This is Christmas Eve," she snapped. Howard looked directly at Olivia. "Mrs. Jenkins asked that certain legal matters be delivered tonight in person." Ashley apparently froze near the dining table. Michael later admitted that was the moment fear truly entered the room, because deep down they all expected me to collapse emotionally. None of them expected me to respond strategically. Olivia forced a nervous smile for the guests. "I think this can wait." "I'm afraid it cannot." Howard's voice remained polite, professional, deadly calm, the same kind of calm I had finally learned myself. One of the guests awkwardly excused herself to the restroom. Another quietly lowered their wine glass, because suddenly everyone realized this wasn't ordinary family drama anymore. This was legal. Howard stepped inside and opened the portfolio carefully. Michael told me Ashley's hand started visibly shaking at that point. Howard handed Olivia the first envelope. "Formal notice regarding financial access violations related to protected educational trusts." Olivia blinked rapidly. "I don't understand." "That's unfortunate," Howard replied evenly, "because documentation indicates repeated attempts were made to inquire about restricted withdrawals." Vanessa immediately interrupted. "This is ridiculous." Howard ignored her completely. Then he handed a second envelope to Michael. "Updated estate directives and notice of immediate suspension of discretionary financial support pending review." Michael reportedly looked stunned. "What support?" Howard held his gaze. "Historical financial assistance records connected to family obligations." That was when Ashley finally spoke. "What exactly are you accusing people of?" Howard turned toward her slowly. "Nobody has been accused of anything tonight. Not yet." Again, he didn't say those last words aloud. He didn't need to. Guests had started quietly moving toward the edges of the room by then. Nobody wanted to witness what was unfolding, but nobody could stop watching either. Olivia reportedly opened the documents with trembling hands, and the moment she saw the audit request attached to the financial review notice, she panicked. "This is insane!" Her voice cracked loudly through the apartment. "She's trying to punish me." Howard remained perfectly composed. "No, Ms. Carter. Mrs. Jenkins is protecting herself." That sentence shattered the room, because suddenly the narrative shifted. Not toxic mother, not unstable widow, a woman defending herself. And people began looking at Olivia differently. Michael later told me it was almost visible, that subtle social shift when wealthy, polished people realized the story they believed may not be true. Ashley reportedly tried regaining control immediately. "This is emotional abuse." Howard turned toward her calmly. "No, ma'am. Emotional abuse would involve isolating an elderly widow from her family while simultaneously pursuing financial leverage over her estate." Silence. Pure silence. Michael said you could hear ice clinking in glasses across the room. Vanessa's face apparently went pale, because for the first time, someone said the truth out loud. And worse, said it publicly. Olivia burst into tears shortly afterward. Real tears this time. Not polished social tears. Panic tears. Because suddenly the image she built online, the brave daughter escaping a toxic mother, was cracking in front of witnesses. Howard handed Michael one final sealed envelope. "This is personal from your mother." Michael stared at it silently. Then Howard gathered his papers calmly and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he said one final sentence. "Mrs. Jenkins wishes all of you a peaceful Christmas. Not angry, not bitter, just devastatingly dignified. And according to Michael, that dignity hurt them far more than rage ever could have, because for the first time they were forced to confront something terrifying. The woman they tried to isolate was no longer emotionally trapped by them, and suddenly the people who thought they controlled the situation realized they might be the ones losing everything instead. Christmas morning arrived quietly in Vermont. Snow covered the fields behind my farmhouse in untouched white layers, while pale sunlight slipped through the kitchen curtains. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang softly through the cold air. Usually, Christmas mornings were loud in this house. Children running downstairs, Carl pretending to steal bacon from the pan, wrapping paper everywhere. Now there was only silence. I stood at the stove making coffee for one when my phone finally rang. Michael. Not a text, not avoidance, a phone call. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Hello? His breathing sounded uneven immediately. Mom. Something inside me tightened. Not fear this time. Instinct. Because mothers always know when their children are breaking. I'm here, I said softly. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call disconnected. Then finally. What did Olivia do? I closed my eyes briefly. So he knew. Or at least part of him finally did. What happened after Howard left, I asked quietly. Michael exhaled shakily. The party fell apart. I leaned against the kitchen counter while snow drifted outside the window. Tell me. His voice sounded hollow. People started leaving almost immediately. I imagined it clearly. The expensive candles still glowing, half-finished wine glasses abandoned on marble countertops, guests whispering behind careful hands. The kind of social embarrassment Olivia feared more than anything. Michael continued quietly. Olivia kept saying you were trying to humiliate her. And another silence. Then Ashley told everyone you were unstable. There it was again. The narrative. The word. Unstable. Not hurt. Not betrayed. Not grieving. Unstable. I wrapped my fingers tighter around my coffee mug. What did you say? Michael's voice cracked slightly. Nothing. That hurt. Even after everything that still hurt. But before I could speak, he added quietly, because I didn't know what was true anymore. The honesty of that stunned me. For weeks, Michael had sounded defensive and distant. Now he sounded exhausted, like a man finally realizing he'd been standing inside smoke so long he couldn't see clearly anymore. He swallowed hard. Mom, those financial documents. Yes, Olivia really tried accessing the kids' trust. She did. He went silent again. Then Ashley knew, not a question, a realization. I closed my eyes slowly. How I saw them discussing it once. My stomach tightened, discussing what Michael sounded ashamed now. They said it was stupid for money to sit untouched while family struggled. Family. Such a dangerous word sometimes. People use it to justify theft, manipulation, control, cruelty, because once wrongdoing becomes for family, conscience gets quieter. Michael's breathing grew heavier. I thought they just meant asking you for help, but they didn't. No. The word came out broken. I walked slowly into the living room and sat near the Christmas tree. The lights glowed softly across the dark windows while my son's guilt filled the silence between us. Finally, he whispered, There's more. My chest tightened instantly. What Ashley's been tracking your accounts? I froze. What do you mean, she made spreadsheets? The room suddenly felt colder. Spreadsheets. She estimated the value of your house, investments, insurance, everything. I felt physically ill. Michael continued shakily, almost rushing now, like he needed the truth out of him before courage disappeared. She kept saying you were vulnerable, living alone. Vulnerable. Not lonely, not grieving. Vulnerable. A target. I stared at the glowing Christmas tree while nausea rolled through my stomach. She wanted control, I whispered. Michael's silence confirmed it. Then he said something that shattered me completely. Ashley said if you were declared mentally incompetent, it would protect the family assets from bad decisions. I nearly dropped the phone. There it was, finally spoken aloud. Not concern, not care, control. My own son had listened to conversations about legally stripping me of independence while I sat alone knitting scarves for his children. Tears blurred my vision instantly, but oddly enough, I still wasn't angry at Michael, because now I could hear it clearly. He wasn't a mastermind. He was weak, weak enough to stand beside evil without stopping it. And weakness destroys families almost as effectively as cruelty does. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. Michael broke. Full sobbing silence poured through the phone before he finally managed, "Because I thought maybe they were right." That sentence cut deeper than every insult Olivia sent, not because it was hateful, because it was tragic. My own son had slowly been convinced I was becoming unstable, not through evidence, through repetition. Ashley questioning my memory constantly, Vanessa feeding Olivia paranoia, online narratives, isolation. Small manipulations repeated over and over until doubt became reality. That's how psychological control works. Not suddenly, gradually. Michael inhaled shakily. "Mom, I think I've made a terrible mistake." I looked around the quiet farmhouse. Carl's old chair. The stockings still hanging untouched. The gifts beneath the tree. A whole life built around love. And suddenly I realized something painful. Good mothers often raise children to be compassionate, but sometimes compassionate children become vulnerable adults because they mistake manipulation for peacekeeping. Michael always hated conflict. Ashley weaponized that. Did Ashley know about Howard, I asked? Yes. And Vanessa? Yes. My stomach twisted. So they had coordinated this together. I suddenly remembered something else from Howard's documents. "Michael, did you sign anything?" Silence. Too long. My pulse spiked. "Michael." His voice became almost inaudible. "A preliminary consultation form." "Oh my God, I didn't think it was serious." "But you signed it." "I know." Tears rolled down my face silently now. Not dramatic tears, devastated ones. Because signatures matter. Legally, emotionally, morally. And somewhere during all those months, my son signed papers questioning my sanity, while I continued loving him without hesitation. The betrayal of that nearly crushed me. But then Michael said something unexpected. "I left Ashley's house last night." I blinked. "What?" "She stayed at Olivia's after the party. And I drove around for hours." His voice sounded hollow. "I kept hearing Howard say you were protecting yourself." A long silence passed, then quietly. Good people don't usually need protection from their children. That sentence landed heavily between us. No excuses left, no confusion, just truth. Outside snow continued falling softly across Vermont, while Christmas morning slipped slowly past. Finally, Michael whispered, "Mom, what happens now?" I looked at the gifts beneath my tree, at Sophie's scarf, at Ethan's telescope, at decades of motherhood sitting quietly inside this lonely house. And despite everything, I still didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. Then another thought entered my mind. Not about money, not about betrayal, about the children. Did Ethan and Sophie hear any of this? Michael exhaled heavily. "No." But Sophie asked why Grandma hates Christmas now. That broke me harder than anything else, because children always inherit the emotional wreckage adults create. I wiped tears from my face slowly. "Michael." "Yes. Your father once told me something after Olivia got caught lying in high school. He stayed quiet. He said character isn't revealed when people are watched. It's revealed when doing the right thing becomes expensive." Silence. Then Michael started crying again, because finally, fully, he understood. Doing the right thing now was going to cost him his marriage, and deep down, he knew he deserved that consequence. Michael arrived in Vermont 2 days after Christmas. I knew it was him before I even saw the car. A mother recognizes the sound of her child's hesitation. His SUV pulled slowly into the snowy driveway just after sunset headlights cutting across the frozen yard. For a long moment, the engine stayed running while he sat inside unmoving, gathering courage, or shame, probably both. I stood at the kitchen window watching softly falling snow collect on the hood of his car, while my heart battled itself inside my chest. Part of me wanted to run outside and hold him. Another part still remembered the conservatorship papers. Love and betrayal are strange companions. They somehow exist in the same room together. Finally, Michael stepped out. He looked terrible, not physically injured, spiritually exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes, unshaven face, heavy shoulders, the posture of a man carrying consequences he could no longer avoid. When he reached the porch, he hesitated before knocking. I opened the door first. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Michael looked at me and burst into tears. Not polite tears, not controlled tears. The kind of crying grown men do, only when something inside them finally breaks completely. "I'm sorry," he choked out. My own eyes burned instantly. "Oh, Michael." He covered his face with both hands, shaking hard in the cold. "I'm so sorry." I pulled him inside before he froze standing there. The farmhouse smelled like cinnamon candles and wood smoke. Snow melted from his boots onto the old hardwood floor while he stood near the doorway trying unsuccessfully to compose himself. "I made soup," I said quietly. It was such a mother thing to say in the middle of catastrophe that he almost laughed through the tears. Almost. We sat at the kitchen table, where I once helped him with third-grade spelling homework and high school college applications. Funny how life circles back to the same tables where people first learned who they were. For several minutes, Michael just stared into his untouched soup bowl. Finally, he whispered, "I don't think I know my own wife anymore." I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence allows truth room to breathe. Michael rubbed his face slowly. "After the party, everything exploded. What happened?" He laughed bitterly. "Vanessa blamed Olivia. Olivia blamed Ashley. Ashley blamed you. Of course she did. And you." He looked down immediately. "I blamed myself." That answer hurt because it was honest. Outside, wind rattled softly against the windows while Christmas lights still glowed around the kitchen doorway. I suddenly realized this might be the first genuinely honest conversation my son and I had shared in years. Michael finally looked up at me. "You were right." "No," I answered softly. "I was blindsided too." He shook his head hard. "Mom, I let them convince me something was wrong with you." There it was again, the wound beneath all the others. Not only betrayal, doubt. My own son doubting my sanity. Michael swallowed visibly. At first it was little things. What things Ashley saying you repeated stories too often? Forgetting appointments. Acting emotional. I stared at him quietly. I'm 67 and widowed Michael. Of course I repeat stories sometimes. I know that now. Tears filled his eyes again. But they kept saying it over and over. That's how manipulation works. Not dramatic lies. Repeated suggestions. Tiny distortions. Eventually, repetition becomes reality. Michael leaned back heavily in the chair. "And Vanessa?" His jaw tightened immediately. "That woman is poison." I said nothing. Because deep down, I already knew. She kept feeding Olivia this idea that you were controlling everyone with money. I almost laughed from disbelief. If I controlled people with money, your sister wouldn't have spent half my retirement savings already. Michael flinched at that. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. He looked miserable. "Mom, I didn't know about the trust funds. I believe you. And I didn't know Olivia was trying to access them. I believe that too." His shoulders sagged slightly in relief, but then he whispered, "I still signed those papers." The room went quiet, painfully quiet, because there it was, the line neither of us could step around. No matter how manipulated he'd been, he still signed them. I folded my hands slowly together. Why? Michael stared at the table for a very long time before answering. Because Ashley made me afraid. My chest tightened. Afraid of what? That if something happened to you suddenly, Olivia would destroy everything. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? He exhaled shakily. Ashley thought Olivia would pressure you into rewriting the estate completely to save the boutique. I blinked slowly. So Ashley wanted legal control first. Michael nodded miserably. She kept saying someone responsible needed oversight. Oversight. Such a clean word for something so ugly. He rubbed both hands over his face. I kept telling myself it was temporary, preventative, just paperwork. But deep down, he looked directly at me then, and I saw the truth all over his face. Deep down, I knew it was wrong. Tears slipped down my cheeks silently, not because of the legal threat anymore, because conscience ignored eventually becomes betrayal. And my son knew exactly when he crossed that line. Michael suddenly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. There's something else. My stomach tightened immediately. What I recorded a conversation. I stared at him. What conversation Ashley and Vanessa? Cold spread slowly through my body. When Christmas night. He unlocked the phone with trembling fingers. They thought I was asleep. He pressed play. At first, only muffled voices filled the kitchen. Then, Ashley's voice became clearer. She's calmer than I expected. Vanessa answered immediately. That's temporary. Old people crack eventually. My stomach turned. Then Olivia's voice appeared faintly in the background. Nervous. What if Howard already suspects something? Ashley laughed softly. So what Renee is isolated now. Nobody questions emotional elderly women acting unstable after family rejection. I felt physically sick. Michael stared at the table in shame while the recording continued. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Vanessa said she never should have had access to that much money anyway. Ashley responded coldly. Once competency review starts, we'll have leverage. Competency review. Leverage. They discussed my independence like businessmen discussing property acquisition. Not family. Assets. My hands trembled violently now. Then suddenly, Olivia's voice cut through the recording sharply. I still think the text was too cruel. The room froze. Michael looked up at me immediately, because we both caught it at the same time. The text. Not your text. The text. Vanessa laughed lightly on the recording. Oh, please. She needed emotional destabilization. My entire body went cold. Michael whispered, Mom, I don't think Olivia actually sent that message. Silence filled the kitchen. Horrible. Heavy silence. Then the recording continued one final time. Ashley asked, Did you delete it afterward? And Vanessa answered casually, Of course not. Let her spiral. Michael shut the recording off. Neither of us spoke for several seconds, because suddenly the entire nightmare looked different. Not random cruelty, not emotional conflict, psychological warfare, carefully engineered manipulation, and somewhere inside all that horror sat one devastating truth. My daughter may not have written the words that shattered my heart, but she still stood beside the people who did. I didn't sleep at all after hearing the recording. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Vanessa's voice again. Let her spiral, not because I was emotionally fragile, because I finally understood how deliberate everything had been. The isolation, the online smears, the financial pressure, the text message. They weren't reacting emotionally. They were managing perception. And somehow that realization hurt even more than the cruelty itself. Michael stayed overnight in his old bedroom upstairs. Around 3 a.m, I heard him walking back and forth across the floorboards above me. The sound reminded me painfully of when he was 14 and anxious about exams. Except this time my son wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of himself. The next morning, snow covered the farmhouse in heavy silence again. I stood in the kitchen, making pancakes mostly out of habit, while Michael sat at the table, staring blankly at his coffee. Neither of us mentioned the recording at first. Some truths are so ugly they poison the air once spoken aloud. Finally, Michael broke the silence. I need to tell Olivia. I looked at him carefully. She may already know. He shook his head immediately. No, not all of it. His voice hardened slightly. I think Vanessa manipulated her too. I wanted to believe that. God help me, I wanted to believe my daughter wasn't completely lost. But another part of me remembered Olivia watching me get erased from the family while doing nothing to stop it. Weakness may not be cruelty, but silence beside cruelty leaves scars all the same. Michael suddenly looked up. Will you come with me? The question caught me off guard. To Boston, he nodded slowly. She won't listen to me alone. Fear tightened in my stomach instantly. Not fear of Olivia, fear of confrontation, of final truths, because once families finally say everything aloud, they can never fully return to who they were before. Still, I nodded. Yes. The drive to Boston took nearly 4 hours through icy highways and gray winter skies. Michael barely spoke most of the way. When he did, his voice sounded hollow. I keep replaying everything. What things? The signs I ignored. I stared out the passenger window quietly. There were many. He laughed bitterly. You know what the worst part is, what I thought I was being responsible. That sentence stayed with me. Because truly dangerous manipulation often disguises itself as responsibility. Ashley never framed things as greed. She framed them as protection, security, planning. That's how good people get pulled into terrible things. By the time we reached Boston, twilight had already settled over the city. Olivia's apartment building rose above the harbor in cold silver glass, while Christmas decorations still glittered along the streets below. Michael parked, but didn't move immediately. She's going to hate me. No, I answered quietly. She's going to hate the truth. There's a difference. When Olivia opened the apartment door, she froze completely. Her eyes immediately landed on me, standing beside Michael. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then she whispered, "Mom." The sound of her voice nearly broke my heart, because for the first time in weeks she sounded like my daughter again, instead of a stranger online. But before emotion could soften anything, Vanessa appeared behind her holding a wine glass, and the second she saw me, her expression changed. Not surprise, calculation. That woman calculated everything. Well, she said lightly, this is unexpected. Michael stepped forward immediately. We need to talk. Vanessa smiled thinly. I don't think Christmas week is the best time for drama. Drama. Interesting word choice from someone manufacturing chaos professionally. Olivia looked nervous instantly. What's going on? Michael turned toward Vanessa directly. Leave. The apartment went silent. Vanessa actually laughed. I'm sorry. You heard me. For the first time in years, my son sounded firm. Not defensive, not uncertain. Firm. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. Olivia. Olivia looked trapped, immediately. Torn. That alone told me more than words ever could, because truly independent adults don't look for permission before responding to conflict. Michael pulled out his phone slowly. I recorded you. Everything changed instantly. Vanessa's face lost color. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for truth to show itself. Olivia blinked rapidly, recorded what Michael pressed play. The apartment filled with voices. Ashley, Vanessa, then Olivia herself. As the recording continued, I watched my daughter's face crumble piece by piece. At first came confusion, then disbelief, then horror. But when Vanessa's voice said she needed emotional destabilization, Olivia physically stepped backward. No, she whispered immediately. Vanessa moved quickly. It sounds worse out of context, Michael snapped. There is no good context for this. Olivia turned toward Vanessa slowly. You sent the text silence. Vanessa recovered fast. Oh, please. You approved it. That's not what I asked. Olivia's voice cracked violently now. You said we were helping her set boundaries. Vanessa rolled her eyes slightly. She's emotionally manipulative, Olivia. Something inside my daughter finally broke. No, she whispered. Then louder. No, tears flooded her eyes instantly. You told me she was controlling us. Vanessa crossed her arms. She controlled you financially your entire life. I finally spoke then, quietly. I financed your survival, Olivia, not your destruction. The room went still. Olivia burst into tears. Real tears this time. Not polished victim tears for social media. The ugly kind. The kind born from realizing you became someone you no longer recognize. I didn't know, she sobbed. Michael's jaw tightened. You knew enough. That sentence hit hard because it was true. Olivia may not have written the text, but she allowed the environment where it became possible, and sometimes moral cowardice creates nearly as much damage as active cruelty. Vanessa suddenly straightened defensively. You're all acting like she's innocent. Nobody answered, because she wasn't innocent. Manipulated, yes. Desperate, absolutely. But innocent, no. Olivia slowly sank onto the couch, covering her face with both hands. I thought she hated me. I stared at my daughter quietly. Why? She looked up through tears. Because every time I failed financially, I felt ashamed around you. My chest tightened painfully. Oh, sweetheart. You always looked so stable, so responsible. Dad, too. She cried harder, and Vanessa kept saying, "You judged me." I shook my head immediately. I worried about you, but I heard judgment. There it was, the real tragedy beneath everything. Shame distorts love. And once shame enters relationships, manipulators find openings. Michael suddenly turned toward Vanessa coldly. You use that. Vanessa shrugged lightly. I helped people see reality. No, I said softly. You helped broken people stay broken because chaos gave you influence. That hit her. I saw it. For the first time, Vanessa looked genuinely angry instead of controlled. Do you know what your problem is, Renee? She snapped. You think being nice makes you morally superior. No, I answered calmly. I think kindness without accountability becomes weakness, and I was weak for too long. Silence flooded the apartment, because that truth applied to all of us. Me, Michael, Olivia. All of us ignored things we should have confronted sooner, and families rot in silence long before they explode publicly. Olivia finally looked at me again, small, lost, ashamed. Mom, her voice shattered. I don't know how to fix this. I looked at my daughter, the little girl who once slept beside me every Christmas Eve, and realized something devastating. Neither did I. 3 days later, all of us sat inside Howard Green's conference room, the same room where Carl and I once signed college savings paperwork for our children, the same room where we planned retirement trips we never got to take. Funny how life circles back to the places where families are either built or dismantled. Outside, January snow drifted slowly across downtown Montpelier, while gray clouds hung low over the streets. Inside, tension filled the room so heavily it almost felt visible. Howard sat at the head of the table reviewing documents calmly. Michael sat beside me, looking exhausted but steady. Across from us sat Olivia and Ashley. Vanessa had not been invited. That fact alone already changed the emotional atmosphere dramatically. Without Vanessa nearby, feeding outrage and victimhood into the room, Olivia looked painfully human again, ashamed, fragile, tired. Ashley, however, looked furious. Not guilty, not heartbroken, angry. There's an important difference. Angry people still believe they deserve control. Guilty people understand they've lost it. Howard finally folded his hands together. Thank you all for coming. Nobody answered. Ashley crossed her arms tightly. I still think this entire situation is being exaggerated. Of course she did. People rarely admit manipulation while still hoping it might work. Howard turned toward her evenly. Mrs. Jenkins recorded conversations discussing competency leverage over Renee Jenkins's estate are not minor misunderstandings. Ashley's jaw tightened. Immediately. We were concerned. Michael spoke before I could. No. You were strategic. Ashley shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. Excuse me. You heard me. I glanced at my son quietly. For the first time in years, he wasn't shrinking himself to maintain peace. And strangely enough, that made him finally resemble Carl again. Ashley leaned forward coldly. So now I'm the villain, because I worried about protecting this family financially. Howard slid several documents across the table. These are records showing repeated estate valuation estimates tied specifically to Mrs. Jenkins' assets. Ashley didn't touch them. Howard continued calmly. Additionally, there are documented conversations regarding competency proceedings before any medical concern existed. Silence. Heavy silence. Olivia looked physically ill now. She turned slowly toward Ashley. You told me this was about helping Mom. Ashley laughed bitterly. Oh, please, Olivia. You benefited from it too. That landed hard because it was true. Olivia immediately burst into tears. I never wanted to hurt her. Ashley's expression hardened. You wanted financial rescue. Don't rewrite history now. I watched my daughter collapse inward emotionally while shame poured across her face. And despite everything, I still felt heartbreak instead of satisfaction. That's the terrible thing about motherhood. Even when your children wound you deeply, watching them unravel still hurts. Howard then opened another folder carefully. Mrs. Carter, he said to Olivia gently, we also need to discuss the boutique accounts. Olivia closed her eyes immediately. There's no point hiding it anymore. Her voice sounded small now. Broken. The business is failing. Michael looked stunned, even though we already suspected it. How bad? She laughed weakly through tears. I owe almost $200,000. The room fell silent again. I felt my stomach twist painfully. 200,000. Dear God. Olivia wiped her eyes shakily. At first I thought I could recover. Then inventory problems started. Then loans. Then penalties. She looked down at the table, and I couldn't bear everyone knowing I failed. There it was, the true engine beneath so much destruction. Not greed alone, shame. People drowning in shame become vulnerable to anyone promising escape. Ashley immediately jumped in defensively. She needed support. Michael snapped back instantly. She needed honesty. Ashley slammed her hand lightly against the table. Easy for you to say now. Howard interrupted calmly before things escalated. The issue here isn't financial struggle. The issue is coercive behavior surrounding Renee Jenkins's independence and estate. Ashley scoffed quietly. Oh, please. Nobody was forcing anything. That was when Howard pressed a button on the conference room speaker system, and suddenly Vanessa's recorded voice filled the room. She needed emotional destabilization. Ashley froze completely. Michael stared at his wife with open disbelief while Olivia covered her mouth in horror. Then came Ashley's own voice. Once competency review starts, we'll have leverage. Ashley's face drained white. For the first time since arriving, genuine fear appeared in her eyes, because recordings destroy plausible deniability. Howard stopped playback calmly. No one is confused about intentions anymore. Ashley immediately stood up. This is illegal. Michael laughed bitterly. No. What's illegal is trying to manipulate competency law against my mother. Ashley turned toward him furiously. I was trying to protect our children. I finally spoke then, quietly, from what Ashley stared at me, from instability. I held her gaze steadily. You mean from boundaries. That hit harder than yelling ever could have, because suddenly everyone in that room understood the real issue. Ashley never wanted family safety. She wanted unrestricted access to money, to influence, to control. Olivia started crying harder. I didn't know it would go this far. Michael looked at his sister painfully. But you still let it happen. Again true. Painfully true. Howard then slid one final set of documents across the table toward Ashley. These are updated legal protections regarding all trusts, medical directives, and property structures moving forward. Ashley stared down at them silently. No discretionary access, Howard continued. No involvement in competency evaluations. No financial authority of any kind. Ashley looked at me then, and for the first time I think she finally realized something important. I wasn't weak anymore, not because I became cruel, because I stopped confusing love with surrender. Ashley's voice turned cold. So that's it, I'm just cut out, I answered before Howard could. No, you cut yourself out the moment you treated me like an obstacle instead of a human being. Silence. Ashley looked away first. That mattered more than she realized, because manipulative people rely heavily on eye contact, dominance, and emotional intimidation. The moment they can't hold your gaze anymore, power shifts. Olivia suddenly whispered, Mom, I'm sorry. I looked at my daughter carefully. Tears covered her face now, her mascara smudged, her shoulders shaking, not polished, not curated, just broken. I was embarrassed, she whispered, and angry at myself. And Vanessa made everything feel like your fault because blaming you hurt less than admitting I was failing. My chest tightened painfully. At least now we finally had honesty. Ugly honesty, but honesty nonetheless. Michael looked toward me quietly. What happens now? That question hung heavily across the room because consequences were unavoidable now. Trust once shattered doesn't magically heal because truth finally surfaces. I looked at both my children for a long moment, then at Ashley, then down at my own hands. 67 years old, widowed, humiliated publicly, almost manipulated into losing legal independence, and somehow I still didn't want revenge. What I wanted was dignity, peace, safety, and finally, after weeks of chaos, I understood something clearly. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. People can be forgiven and still lose the right to control your life. That realization changed everything, including me. Ket thuk fan mui ba. Tip tuk yêu cầu viết du một nghìn, den một nghìn, hai trăm tu, theo quy định viết bằng tiếng Anh. Fan mui bon. 2 weeks after the meeting at Howard's office, I invited Olivia and Michael to the farmhouse. Ashley was not invited. That decision alone caused 3 angry voicemails, 7 long text messages, and 1 dramatic email about family alienation. I ignored all of them, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. For most of my life, I believed being a good mother meant keeping everyone comfortable. Now I understood something different. Sometimes being a healthy person means allowing others to feel uncomfortable consequences. The morning they arrived, Vermont was buried beneath fresh January snow. Smoke curled from the farmhouse chimney while soft jazz played low through the kitchen speakers. I baked cinnamon bread before sunrise because some habits remain attached to love no matter how much pain enters a family. Michael arrived first. He looked better than before, still tired, still grieving, but steadier somehow, like a man slowly relearning how to stand upright after spending years bent beneath emotional pressure. When he stepped inside, he hugged me immediately. Not politely, not briefly. Like a little boy again. "Thank you for letting me come," he whispered. I closed my eyes briefly. "You're my son." The sentence carried love, but also boundaries now. And strangely enough, boundaries made the love feel more honest. Olivia arrived almost 40 minutes later, alone. The moment she stepped through the front door, she burst into tears. Not loud tears, the exhausted kind. She looked thinner than before, her face pale, eyes swollen from weeks of crying. I suddenly saw not only my daughter, but a frightened little girl buried underneath years of performance, pride, and shame. I almost turned around. 3 times, she admitted shakily. I know. She looked around the farmhouse quietly. Everything was exactly the same. Carl's old chair, the family photos, the smell of coffee and cinnamon, the same home she once ran through in Christmas pajamas decades earlier, and somehow that familiarity made her cry harder. Because betrayal feels worse when it happens in places built from love. We sat together at the kitchen table for a long time before anyone spoke seriously. Snow drifted softly outside while silence settled naturally around us. Not hostile silence this time. Honest silence. Eventually, Olivia whispered, "I ended the partnership with Vanessa." I nodded slowly. "How did she take it?" Olivia laughed bitterly. "She told me I was weak and emotionally manipulated by you. Of course she did. Manipulative people rarely believe others leave willingly. They assume everyone operates through control because that's how they themselves function." Michael stirred cream into his coffee quietly. And Ashley moved out. Olivia looked up immediately. "What?" He nodded once. "She's staying with her sister in Hartford." My chest tightened. "Are you all right?" Michael stared down at the table. "I don't know yet." That was the most honest answer possible. Because healing doesn't happen the moment truth appears. Sometimes truth creates collapse first. Then healing comes later, if it comes at all. We spent hours talking that day. Really talking. Not performing. Not avoiding. Talking. Michael admitted Ashley spent years slowly convincing him conflict avoidance was maturity. She always said keeping peace mattered more than confrontation. I sighed softly. "That's not peace, sweetheart. That's emotional surrender." He nodded slowly like the concept still hurt to understand. Olivia admitted something even harder. I built my entire identity around looking successful. Tears filled her eyes again. The boutique wasn't just a business anymore. It became proof I mattered. I reached across the table and held her trembling hand. "You always mattered." She cried harder at that. Because people who chase validation externally usually stop believing they deserve love internally. That realization alone destroys families quietly every day. By late afternoon, I finally spoke about the thing hanging unspoken between all of us. What happened cannot happen again. Both of them nodded immediately. But I continued anyway. Not because I wanted punishment, because clarity protects relationships better than silence ever does. "I love you both deeply," I said carefully, "but loving someone doesn't mean surrendering your safety to them." Michael lowered his eyes. Olivia cried silently. I took a slow breath. So here are my boundaries moving forward. The word boundaries once felt harsh to me. Now it felt holy, necessary, healthy. First, I said gently, the trusts remain completely protected. No access, no exceptions. Both nodded immediately. Second, all financial requests moving forward happen through Howard formally. No emotional pressure. No emergencies dropped into my lap. Again, quiet agreement. Third, this part hurt most. You both need therapy. Michael actually nodded with relief. Olivia looked ashamed, but neither argued, because deep down they both knew this family had been emotionally rotting long before Christmas exploded. Michael, I continued softly, if you want any chance of rebuilding trust with me, you must learn the difference between compassion and compliance. His eyes filled instantly. I know. No, I answered gently. You're beginning to know. That mattered too. Growth starts when people stop pretending they've already changed. Then I turned toward Olivia. You need financial counseling. She winced slightly, but nodded. I know. You also need to stop building your life around appearances. Fresh tears slid down her cheeks. Mom, I was so embarrassed. I squeezed her hand lightly. Pride destroys more families than poverty ever will. Silence settled again after that. Not cold silence, reflective silence. Outside, snow continued falling while evening slowly darkened the farmhouse windows. Eventually, Michael asked quietly, Do you forgive us? That question lingered heavily between us. I looked at both my children carefully, at their guilt, their exhaustion, their humanity. And finally, I answered honestly, I'm trying to. Olivia cried softly again. But forgiveness, I continued, does not erase consequences. They both nodded immediately. Because now they finally understood something important. Love without accountability becomes permission. And permission, repeated, becomes destruction. Later that evening after dinner, Michael carried boxes down from the attic, while Olivia helped me wash dishes in the kitchen. At one point, she suddenly whispered, You know what the worst part is? What I became the kind of person I used to judge. I dried a plate slowly before answering. No. She looked confused. The worst part, I said softly, would have been staying that person. Tears filled her eyes instantly again. Because redemption begins when people stop defending the ugliness they've created. That night after they both left, I sat alone beside the fireplace watching snow fall outside the windows. The house still carried sadness. Some wounds never fully disappear. But for the first time in months, I no longer felt hunted inside my own family. I felt awake, stronger, clearer. Not because I won some battle, because I finally stopped abandoning myself to keep other people comfortable. And at 67 years old, that lesson may have saved the rest of my life. The next Christmas looked nothing like the one before. Thank God. Snow still covered the Vermont fields in soft white layers, and the farmhouse still smelled like cinnamon pine and wood smoke. But this time the silence inside the house no longer felt like abandonment. It felt peaceful. Healing doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like snowfall after a storm. I stood in the kitchen on Christmas morning, wearing Carl's old flannel robe, while blueberry pancakes sizzled on the stove. Jazz music played softly through the house, and for the first time in years, I caught myself smiling without forcing it. Upstairs, I heard children laughing. Real laughter. Not tension disguised as celebration. Sophie came running down first, wearing fuzzy green socks and carrying the scarf I knitted for her the year before. Grandma Ethan's trying to peek at presents. I am not, Ethan yelled from upstairs immediately. I laughed so hard I nearly burned the pancakes. That sound, my own laughter, felt unfamiliar for a moment, like rediscovering a language I almost forgot. A year earlier, I sat alone believing my family was erasing me. Now my grandchildren were arguing over wrapping paper in my hallway. Life is strange that way. Pain convinces you certain chapters are permanent when they're really only transitions. Michael appeared next carrying coffee mugs while still half asleep. He looked different now, too. Lighter. Not perfectly healed, but honest. Therapy had changed him more than I expected. He spoke differently these days, slower, more intentional. He no longer apologized for existing whenever conflict entered a room, and perhaps most importantly, he stopped mistaking silence for kindness. 3 months after Ashley moved out permanently, Michael finally admitted something difficult during one of our therapy sessions together. I spent years believing love meant preventing discomfort. Our therapist replied gently, "No. Healthy love sometimes requires tolerating discomfort to protect truth." That sentence transformed him. Not overnight, but steadily. Ashley still sent occasional bitter emails blaming me for destroying the family. Howard advised me not to respond, and for once I listened, because not every accusation deserves emotional access to your peace. As for Olivia, that healing looked different, harder, more fragile. After ending her partnership with Vanessa, the boutique officially closed in spring. Losing the business devastated her at first. For months, she struggled deeply with shame and depression. But something surprising happened afterward. Without the pressure of pretending anymore, my daughter slowly became more genuine than I'd seen her in years. She started working for a small nonprofit, helping women rebuild financial stability after divorce and debt crises. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Sometimes the people who destroy themselves financially become the most compassionate toward others doing the same. Olivia wasn't with us that Christmas morning in Vermont. Not yet. Healing has rhythms, and trust rebuilds slower than apologies. But 2 weeks earlier, a handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. Not a text, not an email, a real letter. 5 pages long. I kept it tucked carefully inside my desk drawer. I must have read it 20 times. In it, Olivia admitted everything. The jealousy she felt watching me remain emotionally steady after losing Carl while her own life kept falling apart. The humiliation of failing financially after presenting herself online as successful. The addiction to appearances. The resentment she allowed Vanessa to feed, because it felt easier than confronting her own shame. And finally, the sentence that made me cry hardest: "I confused your strength with judgment because I couldn't forgive myself." That's the tragedy of unresolved shame. Eventually, people start hearing condemnation, even in places where love exists. Near noon, while Ethan and Sophie built a crooked snowman outside with Michael, I sat alone briefly beside the fireplace, holding Olivia's letter again. Snow drifted softly past the windows, while the Christmas tree lights glowed warmly across the room. I thought about the previous year, the cruel text, the isolation, the fear, the legal meetings. And strangely enough, I didn't feel hatred anymore. Pain, yes. Sadness, absolutely, but not hatred. Because hatred chains you emotionally to the people who hurt you, and I was finally too free for that. My phone buzzed softly in my sweater pocket. A message from Olivia. "Merry Christmas, Mom. I love you. Simple. No performance, no dramatic guilt, just truth." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I love you too." And for now, that was enough. Not complete restoration, not pretending the damage never happened. Just one honest moment between a mother and daughter trying to rebuild from ashes. Outside, Sophie suddenly banged on the window excitedly. "Grandma, come see the snowman." I laughed and pulled on my boots. The cold Vermont air hit my face sharply when I stepped outside. Ethan stood proudly beside the lopsided snowman, while Michael adjusted Sophie's crooked scarf. For a second, watching them beneath the falling snow, I saw flashes of the family we used to be. Not identical, but real. Maybe stronger, precisely because illusions had finally shattered. Michael walked over quietly while the children argued about whether the snowman needed eyebrows. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked across the white-covered fields stretching behind the farmhouse, then up toward the pale winter sky, and finally back toward my son. "Yes," I answered honestly. And for the first time in a very long time, I truly meant it. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means refusing to let what happened poison the rest of your life. At 68 years old, I finally understood something I wish I'd learned much sooner. Love should never require you to abandon your dignity. Not for a spouse, not for your children, not for anyone. And sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is stop protecting the people who are hurting her long enough for everyone, including herself, to finally face the truth. After everything that happened, I learned that family love alone is not enough to keep relationships healthy. Love without honesty becomes denial. Love without boundaries becomes permission. And love without self-respect slowly destroys the very people trying hardest to hold everyone together. For years, I believed being a good mother meant sacrificing quietly, forgiving endlessly, and keeping peace at any cost. But peace built on fear, guilt, or manipulation is not real peace at all. It is emotional survival, and eventually survival exhausts the soul. What saved me was not revenge, it was clarity. The moment I stopped begging to be treated with kindness, everything changed. I began seeing people more clearly, including myself. I realized that protecting my dignity did not make me cruel. Setting boundaries did not make me selfish, and refusing manipulation did not make me unloving. Sometimes the people we love most will disappoint us deeply. Sometimes they will project their shame onto us because facing themselves feels too painful. But another person's brokenness is never permission for them to break you too. And healing is rarely fast. It comes through honest conversations, accountability, consequences, therapy, distance, time, tears, humility, small repaired moments. And sometimes healing means accepting that relationships may never return to what they once were, but can still become something healthier and more truthful. If you're watching this and you've ever felt rejected, manipulated, or emotionally erased by people you love, please remember this. You are still worthy of respect, even as a parent, even as a grandparent, even after mistakes, even after heartbreak. Thank you for spending this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set painful boundaries with family? Do you believe broken trust can truly heal over time? And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Tonight, none of us should feel alone.